Usually when we talk about a video game changing the industry forever, it's because it was either so good or so popular that publishers, developers, and players were bent around it. Metal Slader Glory is a game that changed everything for a completely different reason. It was not popular, it did not sell well, it's a technological dead end, but it changed everything. Development on Metal Slader Glory started in 1987. That's about 600 Famicom releases ago. Metal Slader Glory was a game caught in development hell for a long time. And the idea for the game had been kicking around for even longer than that. It's rather loosely inspired by the comic Akukan Fixalia. And the artist of the comic, Star Yoshimura, would provide the images for Metal Slader Glory. And that's star as in a picture of a star. Part of the reason the game was delayed so long was because it would be absurdly expensive to produce the cartridges. As it stands, Metal Slader Glory is the largest Famicom game at 8 megabits, and they had to cut out significant portions of the story to make it fit. As the game was nearing release, HAL went on an enormous marketing blitz. Advertisements promised players that it was the most advanced Famicom game possible, and there was even a book released alongside it that detailed the mammoth production. And then the game bombed. Hard. It's 1991. Nobody wants Famicom games anymore. And if somebody wanted an adventure game like Metal Slader Glory, the PC Engine CD-ROM offered an all-around better experience. Being the most advanced Famicom game possible meant absolutely nothing in 1991. HAL's president, Tsuyoshi Ikeda, basically bet the company on the success of Metal Slader Glory. With no money and few prospects, they went hand in hand to a company that they had a close relationship with before, but not so close anymore. Still, Nintendo agreed to buy a controlling interest in the company with just one condition. Ikeda had to be removed as the head of the company and replaced with the brilliant programmer Satoru Iwata. At the same time, Nintendo agreed to take up some troubled HAL projects, like the Game Boy game being worked on by new hire Masahiro Sakurai. Iwata would go on to become president of Nintendo, leading it out of some of the darkest days in the company's history, while Sakurai became responsible for some of Nintendo's biggest franchises. Without Metal Slader Glory, we might not have had the Nintendo DS, Kirby, the Wii, or Super Smash Bros., though I won't hold that last one against it. But there's more to the story of Metal Slader Glory than just this. In the early days of Famicom collecting, Metal Slader Glory was the holy grail. It gained a reputation as the rarest, most expensive game you could get for the Famicom. Now obviously that's not true. In the 20 years since then, people have identified games that are harder to find, and prices on a few other games have outpaced it. But Metal Slader Glory prices still blow the 10,000 yen club out of the water. That's the group of games where a cartridge-only copy would cost you about 10,000 yen. Thanks to sharp increases in the price of Famicom games in the past year, these days you could expect to spend about 40,000 yen for a copy of Metal Slader Glory. So after all of that, what's the game like? Well, the backstory is given in a comic book that was included in the box. In a future extremely derivative of Gundam, a young man living on Earth finds a giant robot. While he had been around industrial mechs, this one was a military design he had never seen before. Within the mech he finds a message warning him that the Earth is in danger and that they have to locate the creator of that mech. And as he goes on this quest across space, his trail is being followed by an evil fascist government. Most of Metal Slader Glory is a streamlined adventure game. Rather than a big menu of commands available at all times, you typically only have 2 or 3 options, and then those might have 2 or 3 sub-options below them. It actually makes it really easy to power through the game, though this is a game where they really pad the length by having you go back and forth between locations, watching long cutscenes as you travel, and of course, repeating the same commands until something different happens. The final act of the game does put you in the cockpit of the giant robot, flying it into a very basic action sequence though I didn't get that far during my recording session. The only really notable thing about Metal Slader Glory is the impressive artwork. There's just tons of huge illustrations used everywhere. Not a whole lot of animation, but there is some. Enough where you understand where those 8 megabits are going. But once you're past that gosh wow factor, there really isn't a whole lot in Metal Slader Glory. You'd think that since they have a giant mech at the heart of the plot, that there'd be some more mech action. Not necessarily action game style action, just going around and doing things in the mech. But the game's really more concerned about you walking around and talking to people along with your childhood best friend and little sister. Are those relationships exactly what you think they are? Absolutely, because there really isn't a whole lot of creativity on display in the storyline for Metal Slader Glory. Eventually, HAL did take a second stab at the game. They made a Metal Slader Glory Director's Cut. It updated the graphics and added back in a lot of the cut content. But they had really bad timing with that one as well. It was the very last Super Famicom game, released to the Nintendo Power cartridge rewriter system all the way in the waning days of the year 2000. As you might expect, Metal Slader Glory is a game that carries a lot of weight in Japanese retro gamer circles. It still remains one of the holy grails on the system for people, but I don't see a lot of people praising it for the gameplay or story, or at least the story gets some real faint praise. Instead, it's all about the graphics and how cute they find the female characters. My own take on Metal Slader Glory is that it's worth one playthrough to see what the game is like. It'll only take you about 3 hours to complete it, but it really isn't some kind of masterpiece locked away behind a high price tag. Not that any game is worth the asking price that Metal Slader Glory carries these days, but in this case in particular, it's not worth it.